You Belong to Me by Hayley Krischer is a young adult psychological thriller set in the world of the wellness and beauty industry. Hi, I'm Dan Skinner, and this is Some Books Considered. Hayley Krischer is the author of Falling Girls, Something Happened to Allie Greenleaf, and Where Are You, Echo Blue? She joins us to talk about her latest novel, You Belong to Me. Hayley, welcome to Some Books Considered.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, first of all, let's start with the inspiration for this novel. Why did you want to write this book?
So You Belong to Me came about because for a few reasons. One, I have a 16-year-old daughter, and a few years ago when she really first started going onto Instagram, I noticed how influenced she was by all of the wellness and, beauty companies. And I found that her interests were so, the way that she was so bombarded by messages over and over again, really started to upset me. And I realized that she wasn't alone, that I also was being, of course, bombarded with so many images and ideals and ways that, we're supposed to look as women and how girls are supposed to look. And I've started really thinking about well, what does it look like if a celebrity wellness guru, can really manipulate us in real life and not just, on the internet. And so obviously, this as well has to do with a little bit of cults. It's really based on a lot of celebrity wellness companies, one that rhymes with the word poop. I won't say the word. But I think, teenagers have always struggled with body image issues, and doctors have really seen an uptick in the number of teenage patients obsessing over what they eat. And they're getting so much misinformation from these wellness influencers. And so when you have a celebrity wellness influencer, of course, you're going to believe them even more because they're in your house, they're in your living room. These are people that you trust. And so I just, that was really sort of the beginning of it.
So it sounds like this novel is a cautionary tale in many ways. So you've taken that premise and expanded on it. So tell us about the plot the readers are going to find here.
Yeah, so You Belong to Me is about a high school girl who falls in love with the daughter of a local wellness guru. She starts working for the wellness company, wearing white dresses like all of the girls who work there, drinking turmeric shots and using expensive beauty products. Her skin isn't that great. And when she starts working there, her skin starts looking beautiful and she's got this glow. And this isn't all bad, but then she's isolated from her friends and things, bad things start to happen. And she starts questioning everything about the company. Have they manipulated her? Are they lying to her? And is this a cult? And it's also really about what it feels like to sort of be an outsider, because my main character, Frances Bean, she is the daughter of a teacher, and she goes to this extremely elite school, and her friends all have an enormous amount of money, and they can afford things that she can't, and they have opportunities that she doesn't necessarily have. And so it creates this place for her where she's easily sort of victimized by this cult because they see her as someone who's vulnerable and who wants to belong somewhere.
And she starts out being very independent. She's kind of a goth girl, but she's also kind of isolated herself, given the makeup of her classmates. So when she makes this transition, I'm sure she feels very welcome. Now she has this whole group of girls that really welcome her, and she feels like she's part of a group. But as you point out, ultimately it turns out to be manipulation. And it seems to be one of the several themes that you explore in this book. One of them, of course, is friendship between teenage girls in particular, and how great that can be, but also how dangerous that can be if it's used against them.
Yeah, I mean, I think all my books are on that same thread of really exploring female friendships and female relationships. And in this book, I really wanted to sort of show what it feels like that when you trust your friends, but you also want to explore other areas of your life. And so when Frances falls in love with Julia, who's, again, like I said, the daughter of a famous wellness guru, she is exposed to a whole new place. And usually your girlfriend and her, or your whoever you're dating doesn't make you turn, against your best friends and turn against everything that you know. And that's where the thought control and manipulation really comes in. And I've always been fascinated by cults, and I've always been fascinated, especially by the Manson family cult. And, those killings were extremely disturbing, in the late 1960s when Charles Manson, manipulated a group of teenagers to murder people. And it's horrific and disturbing. In fact, I think one person actually just recently got out of jail on parole. And so I just wanted to sort of touch on how my book, that the girls are both victims and they're victimizers, because they're participating in a cult where people are manipulated, lied to, and abused. And while the girls in the wellness company aren't all innocent, they're also being preyed upon by the leaders of the wellness company. And this is a really important thing, and something that really disturbs me, because I feel like influencers today, and a lot of wellness and beauty companies, they use these marketing tactics that are very cult-like. And I think that even if you have a strong foundation like Frances Bean does, she has a mother who's, very much present in her life. Her father was an alcoholic, so she does have this, vulnerability and, to her, where she's sort of looking for this other parental figure. But she has very close friends, and they're all intellectuals, and they band together, but she still doesn't feel completely like she belongs. And so, I think that the makeup and wellness industry has always marketed to women and young girls. Obviously, when I was a teenager, I was, buying mascara when I was, in a cheap mascara in the drugstore. I'd go home, I'd put it on with my friends, and, maybe we spent like a couple of dollars on it. But today, these kids are just being so heavily bombarded by different messages. And I think it does create fissures between friends and friendships, because if you have one kid who is maybe buying all of this stuff, and you have a friend who is not as interested in that, or who sees it as a problem, that can create relationship issues between the two of them. I know it sounds sort of trite, but these are important things to kids. And the way that you look is very important to kids. And it's how you sort of decipher who you are in this life.
This book is marketed as a young adult novel. So for what age is it intended?
Well, it's intended for older young adults, I would say, ninth grade and up. But the more people that I've spoken to, I feel like I know a lot of moms who are also reading it with their daughters, and or sons, or kids, whomever. And I've also heard about some grandparents who are reading it with their grandchildren, because it's a psychological thriller. So there's a lot of very, intense moments where there's heavy manipulation going on, and where these sort of cult leaders make Frances doubt who she is and doubt everything that she's learned. Um, you know, and and I think look, a teenager can absolutely read this by themselves, and an adult can read it by themselves. But I've been seeing lately that it's been a great jumping off place for people to read it together and have discussions, because the truth is that the internet is not changing anytime soon. Social media is not changing anytime soon. And their tactics aren't going to be changing. And so I think we need to, as adults, understand that how it's affecting us, but also how it's affecting our children, and be able to have sort of open conversations like, okay, so this person can say to you, can slap the word wellness on it. They could slap the word clean on it. They can slap the word, biohacking on it, but there's really no regulation around that. And you as the consumer have to be aware of what they're selling you. And that's a really hard thing to do as an adult. It's even harder for teenagers. And so I think it's a great conversation to be able to have. Like I said, you can't exactly change it, but at least you can have education around it and sort of some kind of intelligence around it that this is happening.
Well, as you point out, this is based on what you see happening in real life, but what additional research did you have to do to flesh this novel out?
Yeah, so I really read about cults and cult manipulation. I went to the Cult Education Institute and looked at sort of very specific warnings that you should look out for, which are, if somebody has zero tolerance for criticism or questions, if there's absolute authoritarianism without accountability. I mean, these are the kinds of messaging that you always should be on the lookout for, especially more vulnerable people. And I also really did a lot of research about the wellness industry, which is a, six, trillion, $6.3 trillion industry, and it's supposed to hit 9 trillion by 2028. So, wellness itself isn't a bad thing, but wellness, when you're just using it for marketing, is a real problem. And people have learned that they can make an enormous amount of money off of wellness. And I mean, look, there's even a Barbie wellness collection. So, this starts very early, and look, wellness and mental health are super important. There's a question though about how much is necessary, and are we making these kids anxious with all of this wellness marketing? And a lot of doctors and psychologists right now are saying, yes, we are. To the point where I think the New York Times recently did an article about how there are a swarm of teens on Instagram who are wellness influencers themselves. So, I mean, that's what's happening in my book, You Belong to Me. You have these kids who are just, they feel lost, and they want to feel better about themselves. And that's a very common thread. Like I said, these are very run of the mill kids. Yes, they go to like an elitist school, but they want what everybody else wants. They want to feel good. They want to feel like they belong. And so it's, but there's it's very hard to see if people are telling you, oh, everything's fine, you're the problem. Oh no, what you're seeing isn't real. For instance, a group of men start showing up to some of the parties that they have, at the wellness parties that they have, and You Belong to Me. And Frances is like, why are these older men here? I thought this was a party for girls. And they tell her, oh no, they just need, they're financial investors. That's why they're here. And so, without giving away too many spoilers, there's a little bit of a Jeffrey Epstein element there. And I think that was, all of those sort of manipulators in our world right now. Just, I had to sort of pour it out and put it into a book.
Well, there's so many themes here. As you point out, there's the female relationships, there's romance here, there is toxic relationships, obsession, manipulation, a lot of really heavy topics. So, as you mentioned earlier, you're hoping maybe that this becomes a jumping off point for readers, that they can discuss this further, maybe with adults in their life or just other people that will help them sort of navigate what could be a very perilous part of our world.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's just important, for teenagers to have open eyes to what's happening. And I think, the rash of book banning that's going on in a lot of parts of this country is, it doesn't give teenagers credit for, finding out what about the world. You can only in society protect them so much. There is a language that teenagers have that is very different from adults, and they're going to have this language whether you stop them from reading books or not. They're going to find it. And so I think it's really important to sort of shine a spotlight on some of these topics that are a little more challenging, so that if they say, okay, I feel like I'm being manipulated in this situation, um, that's similar to what's happening to this girl in the book, then that only can enlighten you, or at least can open your eyes to, what's happening maybe for somebody else. There are so many cult documentaries right now on Netflix and Hulu, and um, I watched so many of them when I was writing this book about Nexium, about um, the Mother God, and the cult at Sarah Lawrence. There's so many of them. I think that teenagers need a place to understand sort of why all of this is happening, and why do we get sucked into sort of toxic relationships, even if we think we're in a good headspace. I think that we're all susceptible to that. And that's not just necessarily the internet doing it or social media doing it. I think, in this case, when Frances falls for Julia and they start dating, Julia, who is again the daughter of the wellness guru, she doesn't realize that she's been manipulated her entire life. Her mother has been lying to her entire life, and she has just only sort of listened to what she's been told. And it's very difficult for her to even open her eyes to some of the horrors of what's been going on. And I think that kind of gaslighting is something that everybody has to be aware of.
This is a book where you've had to create a lot of really
Oh, thank
well-developed
you.
characters. And so you've spent a lot of time with these characters, but I have a question I like to ask authors of fiction, and it's this. If you could spend a day in real life with one of the characters from your novel, who would it be and why?
I tend to like my villains the best, because I think they're not that people who aren't villains aren't complicated, because of course all of us are complicated. But I find people who lie to themselves the most fascinating. And Deena Patterson, she is the wellness guru in this book, You Belong to Me. Um, and Deena is this very successful person. She created this company from the ground up. She, looks like a celebrity. She's wearing all white. She has this house, this beautiful mansion, and, in a spa in her basement. I mean, she's straight out. She was in Vogue magazine. I mean, she is, somebody that you just want to aspire to be like. But what's wrong with her? She's inviting these grown men to parties, knowing full well what's going on, even though she completely turns her back to it. She thinks to herself, as long as my daughter's not getting hurt, then I'm fine with whatever's happening. She has tons of young girls around. She has a sidekick named Kai, who really does all of her dirty work for her. He's a young college age student who is sort of the cult leader and, does an enormous amount of manipulation. And so I would love to spend the day with her and be inside of her brain and wonder what it is. Where did she decide that she was going to give up all of her values and and turn on herself and the people that she swore she was going to help? Um, and I think that's like that sort of thing happens over time. Obviously, she's not a well person. There's something very wrong with her. But I think that there are lots of people who start out thinking I can do this to help other people, and I believe that's how Deena Patterson, when she first started Deep, which is her company, it's a play off her name. Um, I think she first really wanted to help people. Um, And I really always, when I think of Deena Patterson again, I think of the company that sounds like the word poop, that's run by a famous celebrity. It's a wellness company run by a famous celebrity. And in 2018, there was a New York Times article where there was a story told about this famous wellness celebrity and her company, and that she was supposed to do a big deal with Vogue, and Vogue was going to create an entire separate magazine about wellness and just for this company. And but the person, the celebrity in charge of this wellness company that rhymes with the word poop, they said to her, "We have only one thing that you have to agree to. Everything else you can do." They said, we need to be able to fact check everything you do." And she said, "No, actually, no, that doesn't work for me. We don't fact check." And that's in the article. That's from 2018. That was 7 years ago. And so I think that that's in black and white. This is a person who's saying specifically, no, we're not interested in checking the science of something. We're not interested in doing that. We're just going to sell these products, and we're going to just, and that's it. Thank you very much, but we don't need this deal. And I think if you have someone like that who has so much influence over people, someone who people love and respect and admire, and who has great taste, but this person doesn't care about the facts. And I find that fascinating, because how can you live with yourself at the end of the day if you don't mind lying to people? And so this book, there's a lot of that in it. Me really exploring how you live with yourself.
What's next for you? What can fans of your writing expect to see next?
Oh, goodness. Right now I'm working on a couple of different things. I've got a YA book that I'm working on, and I'm also working on an adult book and more about relationships, complicated relationships.
This young adult psychological thriller novel is You Belong to Me by Hayley Krischer. Hayley, thank you for talking with me today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It was a great conversation.
If you'd like to purchase You Belong to Me by Hayley Krischer, I've placed a link for you in the description below. If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe, like, and click on the bell so you know when I post new interviews. Meanwhile, here are 2 more books you might find interesting. I'm Dan Skinner. Thank you for watching this edition of Some Books Considered.